She thought the city belonged to her. A badge on her chest, a gun at her hip, and an attitude sharp enough to cut glass. Officer Rebecca Cole wasn't just another cop on patrol. She carried herself like the streets bowed beneath her boots. But one ordinary afternoon in downtown Chicago, she crossed paths with the wrong man. And in a single arrogant act, she unknowingly lit the fuse that would blow her world apart. The sun hammered down, making tempers run hot. Crowds flooded the sidewalks, weaving past food carts and honking cars. In the middle of it all, Rebecca strutted through a crosswalk, sunglasses gleaming, every step heavy with authority. That's when it happened. A man in a sharp, gray suit brushed against her shoulder as he passed. He stopped immediately, his tone calm, respectful. Sorry about that. But Rebecca didn't want an apology. She wanted submission. Narrowing her eyes, she stepped into his space, raising her voice so everyone could hear. Watch where you're going. People slowed. Heads turned. The tension was thick enough to choke on. The man didn't argue. He didn't even frown. He just looked at her, calm, steady, unshaken. And that unbothered silence? It set her blood boiling. With a sharp sneer, Rebecca leaned forward. And before the crowd even processed what was happening, she spat. Right onto his clean white shirt. Gasps cut through the air. Phones flew up, recording. A woman on the curb whispered, "Oh my God." The man didn't flinch. Slowly, he pulled out a handkerchief, dabbed the spit away, and locked eyes with her. No anger. No fear. Just a cold, piercing calm that made her smirk falter for half a second. Then he smiled, just slightly, and walked away in silence. Rebecca smirked, proud of herself. But what she thought was victory was actually the biggest mistake of her life. The next morning, Rebecca strutted into the precinct like nothing had happened. To her, yesterday's street clash was already old news. She'd humiliated some random suit in front of a crowd, so what? It wasn't the first time she'd flexed her authority, and it sure wouldn't be the last. But what Rebecca didn't know was that something was brewing inside the station walls. Something that would turn yesterday's smirk into tomorrow's nightmare. The moment she walked through the glass doors, she noticed the difference. The air inside the precinct wasn't the usual mix of caffeine, chatter, and ringing phones. No, today it buzzed with low whispers, nervous laughter, and glances that darted like fireflies. "What's going on?" she muttered to Officer Daniels, a grizzled veteran, hunched over a cup of coffee. Daniels smirked. "Word is, we're getting a new chief." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "So? Old man Jenkins finally retired. About time." Daniels leaned closer. "This one's different. Nobody knows his background. But apparently, he's coming in to shake things up. Big changes." Rebecca rolled her eyes. Another pencil pusher in uniform. Great. But the whispers didn't stop. Everywhere she turned, at the desks, in the hallways, by the vending machine, officers whispered the same thing. The new chief starts today. By mid-morning, the station felt like a pressure cooker. The watch commander kept checking his watch. Secretaries shuffled nervously at their desks. Even the cockiest officers straightened their collars and polished their badges. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, boots kicked onto the desk, pretending not to care. "Whoever he is," she scoffed, "he'll figure out real quick who actually runs this place." But deep down, she felt something gnaw at her. Something she couldn't explain. Because the way everyone spoke about the new chief, like he was more than just a boss, sent a chill down her spine. And in less than an hour, she'd understand why. The station went silent before the doors even opened. It wasn't the usual silence, the kind that came when someone important walked in. This was different. Heavy. Uneasy. Like every cop in the room had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. Rebecca sat at her desk, twirling a pen in her fingers, pretending to be unfazed. But her ears caught everything. The shuffle of boots, the nervous coughs, the whispers slicing through the air. "He's here." The glass doors pushed open. Footsteps echoed across the polished floor. Steady, confident, not rushed, not hesitant, each one landing with quiet authority. Rebecca glanced up lazily, expecting some stiff in a cheap uniform with too many medals on his chest. But when her eyes landed on him, the pen slipped from her fingers. It was him. The man from the street. The man she had spat on just yesterday. Now standing in the middle of the precinct, his uniform immaculate, his badge gleaming beneath the fluorescent lights. "Officers," the watch commander announced, his voice trembling slightly. "Meet your new chief. Chief Marcus Wright." Gasps rippled through the room. A few officers exchanged wide-eyed looks. Daniels nearly choked on his coffee. But Rebecca, her body froze. Her face drained of color. She tried to blink, to convince herself this was some cruel trick. But the calm, piercing stare meeting hers was unmistakable. Chief Wright's gaze didn't waver as he scanned the room. He spoke with a deep, measured tone, each word carrying weight. "I'm not here to make friends," he said. "I'm here to bring accountability, order, and respect back to this department." Rebecca's chest tightened. Her smirk was gone, because she realized in that moment she wasn't untouchable anymore. And the man she had spat on, he wasn't just her boss. He was her reckoning. His eyes found her instantly. Out of dozens of uniforms in the room, Chief Marcus Wright's gaze locked onto Rebecca like a spotlight, freezing her in her chair. She tried to look away, but it was no use. His stare held her pinned, her smug confidence evaporating under the weight of it. The rest of the station stood at attention, eager to impress the new chief. But Marcus didn't waste time on pleasantries. He scanned the room, his voice steady, commanding. "Some of you know me. Most of you don't. But let me make one thing clear. Respect is not optional. It's the foundation of this job." A murmur of agreement rippled through the ranks. But Rebecca shifted uneasily in her seat, her palms damp. Then Marcus paused. His words slowed, deliberate. "Yesterday," he continued, his tone sharpening, "I had an encounter in this very city. One that told me more about this department than any briefing report ever could." Rebecca's stomach dropped. She could feel eyes turning toward her without him even saying her name. "I was disrespected in public. Humiliated, even, by one of your own." His gaze lingered on her now, unmistakable. "And I chose not to retaliate, because true power doesn't need to shout." Silence. The room was so still, the hum of the fluorescent lights felt deafening. Rebecca swallowed hard, fighting to keep her face neutral. But her heart hammered in her chest. The officers around her began to glance between her and the chief, realizing what was happening. Marcus didn't call her out by name. Not yet. But his eyes told the story. And for the first time in her career, Rebecca felt the ground shift beneath her boots. She had spent years making others fear her. Now, she was the one afraid. Whispers travel faster than bullets in a police station. By the end of the day, Rebecca's name was on every tongue. No one said it directly to her face, but she could feel it. Eyes cutting in her direction, conversations dropping to silence when she walked by, muffled laughter in the break room. It wasn't just Marcus's speech that had her on edge. It was the phones. The same phones that had been raised in the crowd yesterday. By now, those recordings were everywhere. On Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. Clips of a white female cop spitting on a man in a suit had already spread like wildfire. Comment sections were brutal. Hashtags exploded. And Rebecca's worst fear? The world didn't yet realize that the man in the video was the new police chief. That bombshell hadn't dropped, yet. Rebecca sat in the locker room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her uniform. She tried to reassure herself. "It's just gossip. It'll blow over." But the door creaked open, and two younger officers stepped inside mid-conversation. "You saw the video, right? Man, if that was me, I'd resign before the chief." They froze when they saw her. An awkward silence hung in the air before they quickly changed course, pretending to grab their gear. Rebecca clenched her jaw, humiliated. Meanwhile, upstairs, Chief Wright was in his office. He hadn't mentioned her by name. He hadn't had to. His silence was worse than any reprimand. Every move he made seemed deliberate, like a predator circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. Rebecca couldn't shake it. The calmness in his eyes yesterday, the slow way he wiped her spit away, it haunted her. She had spent years controlling others with fear. Now, for the first time, she was the one being silently dismantled. And she hadn't even faced him one-on-one yet. When her name echoed through the precinct, Rebecca's blood ran cold. "Officer Cole," the secretary called, her voice carrying across the bullpen. "Chief Wright wants to see you." Now, heads turned. The room fell into that suffocating silence again, the kind that told her everyone knew exactly why she was being summoned. Rebecca stood stiffly, forcing her legs to move, her boots clicking against the tile like a drumbeat of doom. The chief's office loomed at the end of the hallway, glass walls gleaming under fluorescent lights. Inside, Marcus Wright sat behind his desk, posture relaxed, but presence overwhelming. He didn't need to shout to command the space. The power was in his stillness, in the sharpness of his eyes that never seemed to blink. Rebecca stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Chief," she said, trying to sound steady. "Sit." The word was calm, but it wasn't a request. She obeyed, lowering herself into the chair opposite him. For a long moment, he said nothing. He simply studied her, his fingers steepled, his silence louder than any reprimand. Finally, he leaned forward. "You know why you're here." Rebecca swallowed. "Sir, if this is about—" "Don't insult me," Marcus cut in sharply. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried weight. "Yesterday, in broad daylight, you spat on a man in public, a man who had done nothing but brush against you." Her chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to deflect, to pull rank. But his stare stripped every excuse bare before it could leave her lips. "You didn't know who I was," Marcus continued, his tone measured. "And that's exactly the problem. You treated me the way you treat the people you swore to protect. Arrogance, disrespect, abuse of power." Rebecca's lips parted, but no words came. Marcus leaned back, letting the silence linger. "Tell me, Officer Cole, do you think a uniform makes you untouchable?" Her throat tightened. For the first time in her career, Rebecca Cole had no answer. By the end of the week, Rebecca's face was everywhere. What started as shaky cell phone footage on a stranger's TikTok had exploded into a national firestorm. Morning talk shows replayed the clip. News anchors debated police accountability. Headlines screamed across the internet. "Cop spits on man in public." "Chicago officer faces backlash after shocking incident." And then came the twist no one saw coming. A local journalist dug deeper, connecting the dots. The man in the gray suit? The man who had walked away in silence? He wasn't just anybody. He was Marcus Wright, the new chief of police. The story went nuclear overnight. Rebecca's badge number, her history of complaints, even her disciplinary record were dragged out into the light. At the precinct, the fallout was worse. Officers avoided her in the hallways. Friends who once laughed at her jokes now kept their distance. She wasn't feared anymore. She was pitted. Some even whispered that she was finished. At home, it was no better. Rebecca sat on her couch, TV flickering, her phone vibrating with hateful messages and calls she couldn't bear to answer. Her once proud posture was gone, replaced by slumped shoulders and sleepless eyes. Meanwhile, Chief Wright never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His silence outside their meeting spoke louder than any press release. Every time he walked past her desk, the room seemed to tilt. Every officer stood taller, straighter, eager to align themselves with his quiet strength. Rebecca's world was unraveling. And deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't just about one mistake. This was years of arrogance catching up to her in a single moment of karma. And Marcus Wright, he wasn't just her boss anymore. He was her judge. The conference room felt more like a courtroom. Rows of officers sat stiffly, their eyes locked on the long oak table where Rebecca Cole took her seat. The blinds were drawn, the air heavy with anticipation. Nobody spoke above a whisper. They didn't need to. Everyone knew this was her reckoning. At the head of the table sat Chief Marcus Wright. Calm, unmoving, his uniform crisp, his presence undeniable. He didn't slam a gavel or pound his fist. He didn't need theatrics. His silence commanded more respect than any outburst ever could. "Officer Cole," he began, his voice measured. "We are here to address your conduct. The incident is no longer a rumor. It is public record. The city has seen it. The nation has seen it." Rebecca's palms sweated against the table. She tried to hold his gaze, but the weight of his stare was suffocating. "You spat on a civilian without provocation," Marcus continued. His tone sharpened, each word precise. "That alone is grounds for disciplinary action. But what makes this worse is not who I am. It's what you represent when you wear that badge." The room was silent, every officer absorbing his words. Marcus leaned forward, his voice lower, colder. "A badge is not a shield for arrogance. It is not a weapon to humiliate. It is a promise, to serve, to respect, to protect. You broke that promise in broad daylight." Rebecca's chest heaved. She opened her mouth, but the words tangled in her throat. Excuses, apologies, rage. All of it felt useless. Then Marcus delivered the final blow. "You didn't just spit on me, Officer Cole. You spat on the trust of this city. You spat on the uniform itself." The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca's heart pounded. For the first time, she realized this wasn't just about losing her badge. It was about losing herself. The room held its breath. Every officer leaned forward, waiting for the chief's words to land like a final gavel. Rebecca sat stiff in her chair, her pulse pounding so loudly she could barely hear. Sweat beaded at her temples. This was it. Chief Marcus Wright didn't rush. He let the silence stretch, making her sit in the weight of her own actions. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, deliberate. "Officer Cole," he said, "you stand accused of conduct unbecoming of this department. The evidence is undeniable. The public has seen your actions. The city has judged. Now it is my duty to decide what happens next." Rebecca's hands gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. 1,000 thoughts swirled in her head. Plead for mercy? Deny? Resign? But her lips wouldn't move. She was frozen. Marcus rose slowly to his feet. His presence filled the room. "I could strip you of your badge today," he continued. "I could end your career with a single stroke of this pen. And many here would say it's what you deserve." A ripple of tension passed through the room. Eyes darted between him and Rebecca. "But I believe in accountability," Marcus said firmly. "And accountability is not just punishment, it's change. True change. You will remain suspended without pay pending further review. Your record will reflect this incident. And from this day forward, every action you take in this uniform will be under my direct watch." Gasps and whispers erupted. Suspension wasn't termination, but it was a public shaming, a mark that would follow her forever. Rebecca's face burned. Relief battled humiliation inside her chest. He hadn't destroyed her, not yet. But he had made sure she would never walk through these halls the same again. Marcus's eyes locked on hers, cold and unflinching. "Consider this your last chance. Because the next mistake you make will not end with a hearing. It will end with the loss of that badge." Rebecca's breath shuddered out. The verdict was CLE. By the time the hearing ended, Rebecca's world had collapsed. She walked out of the conference room under the weight of dozens of eyes. No one spoke to her. No one offered sympathy. The officer who once strutted through the precinct with arrogance now felt like a ghost, present, but already fading. Her locker sat half open, her nameplate crooked. She stared at it for a long time, her reflection in the metal distorted, broken. A few weeks ago, she had believed she was untouchable, above the very people she was sworn to serve. Now, she was reduced to whispers and shame, her badge temporarily stripped, her career dangling by a thread. At home that night, she sat in silence. No TV, no phone, just the memory of that crowd gasping, the image of SPITS sliding down a clean white shirt, and the calm, piercing stare of the man she had tried to humiliate. Chief Marcus Wright, meanwhile, worked late in his new office. His presence had already transformed the department. Officers stood taller, their conversations sharper, their respect for the uniform renewed. For the first time in years, the precinct felt like it belonged to the city, not to egos, not to bullies, but to something greater. And yet Marcus never gloated. He didn't need to. His power was in restraint, in letting actions speak louder than vengeance. He hadn't destroyed Rebecca with anger. He had dismantled her with truth. The final irony lingered like smoke. Rebecca had spit on him, thinking he was beneath her. But when the truth came out, she realized she had spat on the very man who now held her entire future in his hands. Karma doesn't knock. It walks right through the door. And this time, it wore a chief's badge.